started to let our guard down a little bit. So we've rested a little bit, and we've been praying, we've been reflecting on God's word, reflecting on our experience. Now what I want to do is I want to go a little bit deeper. So I want to talk, first of all, my own retreat experiences. So when I do retreats, I tend to do them by myself. I spend, between 3 to 5 to 7. The longest I've done was like 14 days. And on one particular retreat, I was having a good retreat, but it's interesting. I think sometimes one of the real dangers with the spiritual life is we tend to think things are good when they feel good. That's a common misconception, right? So when things really feel good, we're like, I must be close to the Lord. I must be doing everything right because I feel good. And we do want to feel good. We don't want to feel bad all the time. But the reality is when we're giving time to the Lord, sometimes some of the things that we have to work through are anger, they're pain. Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. And that's part of the beauty of Lent, because what it teaches us through prayer and fasting and through the disciplines of Lent is that in the midst of discomfort, we can connect with the love of the Lord. Because fasting, what it helps us is kind of like we give ourselves a bad day intentionally. So we give ourselves a bad day when we fast. We know we're going to be grumpy. We know that all that stuff is going to surface, but yet we can anticipate it, right? A lot of times when I'm working with somebody in spiritual direction or in confession, and they have an issue with anger, or they're having issues with their kids, what I do for their penance is I say, anticipate 3 things that your husband will do that will make you upset. Like, anticipate it in advance, right? So I say, and then I want you to do is I want you to change your reaction to it. Work on adapting a new strategy. So you know that your husband's going to do these 3 things, or you know the situation's going to come up again, because we tend to live in patterns, and patterns tend to always exist in our relationships, but anticipate an area of growth. So that's often what I give with spiritual direction, with confession. And one of my own particular times, one of my best insights from retreat was actually not when my spiritual director understood me and when I was happy, but precisely when my spiritual director really ticked me off. So the spiritual director was Father Sean Mahoney, who's at Temple University. He was our rector for a little while in the seminary, and he's famous for his holiness. The man's probably one of the holiest guys around. He's an incredibly holy priest up in Philadelphia. And I was having a phone call with him. I was in a monastery doing my retreat by myself. So this is the fascinating dynamic. Your spiritual director could be literally one of the best spiritual directors in the country or in the world, and there's still going to be misunderstandings. So even with somebody who, for all intents and purposes, probably hasn't committed a mortal sin in like 50 years or something, and doesn't intentionally sin, even then there's misunderstanding. So I was on the phone call and I was describing my prayer life, and just the tone in which he talked to me, the conversation really ticked me off. I was like, this guy does not understand what I'm about. So, and I mean, that's kind of funny because he was my mentor and an important person. But that's what happens sometimes in retreat. Some of this stuff surfaces. So I got really fired up and I wrote out a description of my prayer life. And I was really motivated. I said, I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm going to talk about it directly. Everything I know is going to go into this. And what happened was it actually ended up being very well structured, because I'd been studying prayer and meditation and been studying that for my master's thesis. And it became the fruit of future work. But it was all because my spiritual director had ticked me off. And I sent it to him, and he kind of was more understanding after that. But so now what we want to get into is that sense of healing. So let's start to talk about Mark 8. So if you open your packet to the Mark 8 through 11 through 13, and then we'll skip and go to 22 through 26. We're going to start off with the Pharisees. Pharisees are always interesting, right? They're always messing up. Not all of them, but most of them. So Mark 8 through 11 through 13. So the Pharisees came forward and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. He sighed from the depth of his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Amen, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Then he left them, got into the boat again, and went off to another shore. So the reason why I included this, because it comes right before the passage that I really want to get to, is I wanted to draw our attention to an attitude that's going to be counterproductive. So this is one of the challenges. We have many things in our life where we need growth. We have many things that are unresolved. We have many things that maybe need healing. And one of the fundamental attitudes that's going to keep us from that relationship with the Lord is demanding that God work according to our plans. God working according to our designs. When we say, Jesus, not that I need you to do something, but Jesus, I want you to do this exactly the way I want, when I want, according. So let's try not to have the attitude of the Pharisees in that regard. And so again, going back to that rested mode. So instead of saying the doing mode says I need to problem solve, I gotta analyze this, I gotta figure all of this stuff out. The resting mode is more I'm going to wait for the Lord. I'm going to see how He inspires me. I'm going to let Him open and take the lead. Open one door at a time. So, also in this regard, I picked up on this when I was praying and preparing for this retreat. I started to realize that actually a lot of our Lenten sacrifices and penances sometimes take on the mode of the Pharisees and trying to fix problems. So you often hear, and I don't want to completely sound critical because I think sometimes it's well intended, but people will say, I'm going to give up complaining for Lent, or I'm going to give up this sin for Lent. I'm going to stop being angry for Lent. At first I objected to that because if we could really just change our behavior that quickly, a lot of us, we would be different people, right? Or at least there would be parts of us that would be different. So we can't just flip a switch and change our behavior. But I also started to realize that it's kind of in this doing mode. And that's kind of what the Pharisees, so the penances, traditional penances, are more receptive. So I fast, and then in that fasting, I see where the Lord inspires me. I give up chocolate or something, hopefully a little bit more than that. I give up coffee or I give up sweets. And in that craving, I wait for the Lord to open a door in my heart. I petition the Lord to open a door in my heart. So I think there's almost like two classes of penances that are popular when you're online and you're seeing people comment. There are ones that are about trying to fix problems according to my own designs. And there are ones that say, I'm going to sacrifice and wait for the Lord. So I think that spirit of waiting for the Lord needs to be what's the hallmark of our penances and our prayer. So we make ourselves available. So when we're fasting, what a lot of times it does is it stirs up all of that garbage. It stirs up all those frustrations, all of those negative thought traps, all of that negativity surfaces. So let's continue on. So there's the blind man of Bethsaida. So when they arrived at Bethsaida, they brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. So one of the things I kind of want you to imagine is imagine the scene. So if you've ever seen, one of the beautiful things, I think it's a great treasure right now to have Europe because in America, we don't really have center cities unless the city was built before the car, right? Because of the advent of cars, we don't have that strong central part of the city. So, but in that time, in Jesus' time, there's probably been like a main courtyard. And a lot of times what Jesus would do is he'd go to the synagogue and he would teach in the main courtyard. He would teach in the main area. So remember, wherever Jesus is going, people are crowding around him. They're trying to get a connection with Jesus. So there was a blind man. He took the blind man. So what he did then is he takes the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Interesting detail, right? He leads him outside the village. I think that's the beauty of retreats. That's the beauty of also having that meditation time period where you step away from your daily routines. You step away from all of the things that are familiar and you spend that time alone. I think that's also sometimes the beauty of like pilgrimages and different things like that. We step outside of ourselves for a moment, which then gives us a new perspective. So I think that would be spiritually understanding this reading. Symbolically, we have to let the Lord take us outside of our comfort zones, outside of the village. Then he, putting spittle on his eyes, he laid hands on him and said, "Do you see anything?" So I love this. It's interesting, the different miracles and just praying with the imagery. He takes spit and then he puts it in his hands. This is the one where he mixes it with clay. I think it's another one. And he rubs his eyes. Just imagine how close the Lord was to this person. In other situations, he does heal from afar. But we really need to let the Lord close into our hearts. We need to let him into our areas of woundedness, pain, different things. One of the exercises I do a lot of times to help people with this around the healing of memories is when people have particularly painful memories, I ask them to imagine Jesus in the scene with them. So I ask them to imagine somewhere Jesus is in the room with you and just let him into the memory. Let him into that areas of woundedness. So also with that, what happens a lot of times with the woundedness of sin, and this has been talked about a lot. A lot of people have written a lot of different things. I'm just going to kind of summarize it, but there's always more that we can learn about this. What often happens is when there's some kind of pain or there's some kind of trauma, and actually I would say this, even if it's not pain or trauma, often when we're a kid or we're younger, we experience sin in the world. For me, I don't remember this memory, but my mom tells the story that one day when she came home, and I was coming home from school, she found little Ian hugging a fire hydrant. I was hugging it and crying at the same time. And I said, the world is so cruel. I mean, we kind of joke around about it, but it was something had happened at school, and I was upset about it. And there's a sense that when we experience that, even sometimes it's really extreme. It's a really bad thing, a really painful memory, but it's also just the element of sin. We encounter sin in the world. We encounter disease. We encounter pain. We encounter hurt. And what often happens is that what can form around that area of woundedness is lies about ourselves and the world. I've heard it so many times when I'm working with people. Somebody will say, I was hurt as a child, and I decided when I was a child that I wasn't going to let anybody hurt me again. I was going to be in control. And even though that person didn't mean to sound like a Pharisee, it kind of was, right? I'm on control. God's going to act according to my plans because the enemy had gotten in there and sown that lie. And then eventually, those lies, the more we believe them, start to crystallize and influence who we think we are. I'm always just kind of cynical. I'm never going to be that happy-go-lucky person. That's just not me. No, the Lord wants to unleash joy in your life. He wants to bring healing so that you can experience joy. So then, continuing on. He asks him, do you see anything? Then the guy's looking up, he replied, I see people looking like trees and walking. I love this part. There's this bridge gap. It's funny when you think of it. Well, did Jesus mess up that day? I mean, whoops, I did the wrong combination of spittle on this one. Let me fix it. No, I've often, Jesus, when something happens, it's to teach us some lesson. And what I would say is, one of the real challenges we can have if we look at all of the miracles is having this feeling that everything's fixed at once. And maybe we're taking one step today, but there's often intermediary stages. So maybe right today, you're just going to take one little step. I often tell people when in spiritual direction and confession, when they first talk about something, I say, you're far way along the way. You've started to talk about it. And that's a powerful thing. But it's a process. So one of the stories that gets into this with this process thing is when I was I don't want to completely call out the person. I got to figure out the best way to tell the story. So I had somebody who's in charge of me. Let's just say that. And they had to write a report. And let's just say the time I spent with the person didn't go very well. So they were supervisors when I was in the seminary. And the person was meant to supervise me. And even within the program, the idea was it was like a mentor, like an older mentor. And the person was supposed to walk you along and hold you by the hand kind of thing and get to know you and to support you. Well, it had just gone bad from day one. We just had a lot of misunderstandings. And we came to the end, and the person didn't tell me this, but they tried to get me thrown out of seminary. So it was a particularly uncomfortable moment. And I was angry about that for years. I was fired up about it. And I was shown, and the worst part was I was shown, and this is how the enemy often works. And I hate to call this person the enemy, but the things that they decided to focus on almost seemed like a little bit off. So they said I wasn't good with kids, which I'd been a high school teacher. So all my formators were like, this person doesn't think you're good with kids. Like, that's weird, because like you were a high school teacher and you're known for working with kids. And then they said that I was racist and didn't like Hispanics. And what they didn't know was I was going to Mexico right afterwards. But it's something about it that really fired me up. And I would love to say it was a great experience, but guess what? For 3 years, almost monthly, I had to confess saying something bad about the person. It was a long process. In the beginning, I was so mad that, it didn't bring out the best version of myself, let's say that. So, but that's what I'm saying is it's a process of healing. And that's just one example from my life, but we all have areas like that. Areas where people have hurt us, they've done things to us, and sometimes it's maybe not as dramatic as that. Maybe it's a little bit simpler, but we need to invite the Lord into that. And again, it's a process over and over again. So the next part. Then he sent him home and he said, do not even go into the village. Then he laid hands on his eyes a second time and he saw clearly. His sight was restored and he could see everything distinctly. So ultimately, when the Lord heals us, we start to see more clearly. I'll be honest with you, with that particular person, as I learned to forgive the person and I came to a place of greater peace with that person, I now am at a point, because I allowed the Lord into it over time, that I think I could treat the person fairly. Like, if at some point I have to make some decision that affects that person's life, or I think I'm at a place where I'm not holding on to the anger anymore. But I wouldn't have been that way, this was probably like 5-6 years ago. So it's probably the first 3 years, I probably wouldn't have been that place immediately. So again, just being patient with the process and kind of being open to it. So what I want to do now, for the next 15 or 20 minutes, again, going back to meditation. So the same handout parts where we do the questions, we do the dialogue with Jesus. I want you to pray around areas of woundedness and invite the Lord into that and just meditate on that and pray with it.